Good morning, everyone. So the question was practical solutions to reach the heart of our fellow men and how to translate and apply in the world of today the ideas generated during this Convivium. We started talking about the starting point for translating and applying these ideas, and that it should be more or less a sort of attitude of empathy towards others. So trying to identify with others first, and although you're trying to be loyal to your own ideals and be firm to hold to your own principles, you will always appreciate others and listen, because you recognize that everyone is a spark from the divine. So you have to be patient and trying to not to teach like being a tutor in front of the class, but just by being an example and try to inspire others in everything you do, in the way you do it, as well as what you say. So it's like the Paramita says, act and words have to be in harmony. There's also a quote, somebody, I think it was from the Voice of the Silence, correct me if I'm wrong, Thea, you came up with it, that if you can't be a sun, you can be a humble planet. So there's always a way to inspire. And then we talked about coming from that attitude, how to do it, and that we all have our own duties to do. So it's also, like the Bhagavad Gita says, the duty of others is full of danger. So you also have to just follow your own path and do it the best you can. And that it's not in things like politics, for instance, which is mostly about opinion, as Plato perfectly describes also. That we try to be always above politics as Theosophists. And so trying to show your own potential, but also encourage the potential of others. And encourage them, but not to expect too much, because you have to beware of placing your own ideals as expectations upon others. So you have to really beware of that. And then Nicholas also mentioned the Tower of Infinite Thought, but it's a bit difficult for me to explain it. Maybe you can no? Okay. So we'll maybe we can hear it later from you. Okay, and there's also a quote, I think Truth came up with that meditation without self-study will lead to delusion, and that self-study without meditation will lead to self-obsession. So you really need the balance of the both. And we talked also about, like we do that in a large meeting, that when you have people together, you don't do it alone. You have people together, and if they all resonate or try to resonate with each other and with the highest in themselves, that you really have a sort of magnet. And at last we spoke about the harmony between content and form, actually. So that you have to, I think we had one good example. Let me see. That it's not only you always use different media to transfer your message. It can be text, language, art, the modern media, internet. But you always also have to, the media has to fit the message. So that's also very important. And you also see it the other way around, that KT, for instance, with her example of how children learned how to write, that still there is also the highest ideas in that. So that the form and the content have to be in harmony with each other. That was, are there any more things I left out maybe? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the other one? The mid-section?
Well, I made notes, so the ideas vary a little bit in abstract and concrete, but I will just produce what he has spoken of. First was we have been inspired during ITC and these Convivium meetings, and we should try to keep the momentum which we have built up now together. We will be seeing each other next year maybe, but we will have to stay in touch and share our enthusiasm. That is the first point. Keep on going, networking with the people we've met. That's the second point. How are we going to share the ideas, new ideas we've heard during the last week? How are we going to share them with other people? So the dissemination of those ideas, lectures, via the internet or other ways. We also spoke about articles that are being produced in other languages than English, like for instance in Dutch, how we could translate them into English. I know I talked about this subject a number of days back with Nicholas about it, and he suggested just to use websites, you know, to raise this point of required capacity of translation from Dutch to English, to do something about that. Try to think about themes for coming years and the years after that, what we should produce lectures on. Then another thing we addressed was how we can approach different groups in society in an appealing way. And one of the ideas that Alden Tucker came up with was the idea of what they called meet-up groups on the internet. That seems to be a new way of attracting people by going on a certain, this is called meet-up groups, putting a few keywords in a certain website, and then people will find this with a searching machine, and that you define a certain activity on a certain moment, and people will subscribe for this activity. And this seems to be a new way of organizing meetings. So I think we have to look into that. Now it's with real life people meeting each other. It's in flesh and blood, so to speak. Another thing that passed was the work forum. We have had, during the last couple of days, 2 workshops, one of April and one of Richard. In both of them were very nice experiences. It's not really the form of a course. We have our course Thinking Differently, but in Holland we're also having experience with workshops. And this also need to be further developed because it's obvious a very good work method, and we should try to further develop that. There was also a pledge for more focus on education being a general approach in itself, to approach educational institutions, for instance, with the material that we have. We should also try to disseminate the material of the Convivium, the ideas, in one way or another. And then introduce the English language version of the course Thinking Differently here in the US, was one idea. And also to have more English lectures, English language lectures available, and for instance make podcasts of that. And the last point was promotion of activities in various ways. That was the list that we produced.
And then the representative from the last group.
We had a relatively long list of activities, but we found out that we basically could group them under 3 headings. The first being how to preserve all the good thoughts which we have shared among each other during those days, including the material, and also keep track of new developments. It's one of the things one could try to realize with each other in the future. The second element was how to communicate and set up a good communicate network. And the third and not the least heading and element is to put those ideals you have developed into practice yourself. So under these 3 headings comes a number of things to do, and additional elements and elaborations of those 3 points. In the communication, it's important to do the translation in a simple language, and using indeed the right thought elements as advocated and elaborated yesterday by Richard. It's important to, when you communicate, to keep the teachings pure, and also only in this way, when you distribute pure teachings, you will reach the heart of your fellow man. In your activities, in the communication activities, you can look at what is already happening in the world and around you and with other Theosophical groups. You don't have to start everything all over again from scratch when something usable is there. And if you're so full of ideas that you simply are overflowing, then you may blog about it or Twitter about it or use anyway the new media in a hopefully intelligent way. In the way you practice ideas yourself, it's a good attitude to forget yourself, to show interest in other persons, to find qualities in other persons instead of gossiping, continue with making friends, educate people. There was an example, for instance, given of a person who educated a cashier while he wanted to pay the real regular price for an article that he has bought, and the cashier said, "Okay, don't worry, don't bother. This is a small amount of money. You are already past the cashier's stand," and then really persist on paying the right price, and in that way you really show something and you do a piece of education of the cashier. If you set priorities in the right way, if your neighbor needs help, don't continue with the study or the meditation you intended to do, but first things first, so set the priorities right, do what needs to be done, stay alert, see opportunities, and if you think you're meeting some obstacles, try to overcome those by seeing them as challenges and possibilities. Try to step out of the box like KT did. So overcoming obstacles and giving things a new turn while following your inner vision. And in your contacts with other people, don't be pushy. Find out what is really needed and know the person. Try to understand whom you're talking to and what the real needs are. And in all this, reach out to your fellow Theosophists as well as the general public and people around you. That was more or less it. Yeah.
Okay. We're coming then to the point for having a general discussion about the 3 points we have studied and conclude yesterday. There are, of course, I just put them on the screen for you to remember them easily. There are, of course, a number of very deep questions involved in it. Questions what is not always easy to answer. What is a modern day mystery school? What is the opportunity for schools like this? What can you use of the modern technique and what can you not use of the modern technique without violating the principles, the way of working and so on? That is one of the big let's say temptations we have nowadays. It is so easy to spread information, and in a number of cases you like to spread information only in a certain amount of in a certain sequence, or just hand it out after a certain time that people study it to be sure that everything will be understood on the right way. And you feel responsible. Some people get a lot of information and they do nothing with it. That is not even the worst case. The worst case is people get information and start to do things with it that you say, how can they do it? Yeah. And the other hand, the third group is they use it in the proper way. So, and all, let's say, type of intermediate levels in that. What is your conclusion from it? Because for us it is very important. We're working hard to spread theosophy. We like to teach people. We like to make them aware of responsibilities. We like to let them grow in the right way according to the mystery school principles, to develop in the right way. And there is a very important, let's say, thing in it. What is the opinion on your side? Do we have a mic around, Ben? Okay. Who likes to say something?
Just briefly, I think within question 3 is then a really important piece of that is looking at the overview of what is the Theosophical movement today and distinguishing Theosophical movement from Theosophical societies. So that becomes, when we talk about practical solutions to reach the heart of our fellow men, the heart of that is within the existing Theosophical movement in its multiple forms in the world. So for example, today you could see as an example of someone who also makes the same distinction in the Dalai Lama. So a few weeks ago he gave teachings from traditional Tibetan Buddhism in Washington, D.C. on the Great Wheel of Time, or Kala Chakra, for 10 days. And then a few days later he gives a talk in Chicago hosted by the Theosophical Society in America on really Theosophical movement principles that are his core ideas as well. You know, universal responsibility, you know, how, you know, ethics for the new time. You know, he talks about very practical, very basic, very universal concepts. So I think in that sense he is an example of how to carry. So all those principles he's sharing in the broad world, of course, are found in traditional Tibetan Buddhism. If he tried to share traditional Tibetan Buddhism in the venues, for example, in Chicago, it wouldn't work at all. Those, the 15,000, 10 or 15,000 people in Washington, D.C. were people who understand the language of ancient Tibetan Buddhism. So they can listen and get some idea, at least a partial idea, of what Kala Chakra is about. But if he was to use that same language to the group in Chicago, they would all fall asleep. It would be totally useless. So I think just show that as an example.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think for us, more or less in the same line what Kent is saying was, we had the situation in the ITC meeting last days, the presentation of the HeartMath Institute was very welcome by a lot of ITC people. And from our organization, we really feel the need or urge to say something from Theosophical point of view on the same subject. Why? Because if you present it like a very technical way from the bottom, from the material side of view, you missed the whole spiritual aspect, what is a very important rule in that. So that was one of the motives in our organization to work with a couple of people together and try to push and lecture what is coming from Theosophical point of view and give answer on the same questions. And I think that works very well. But that was something that we had the feeling, yeah, we have to do it. If we don't do it, the direction of the people is so much attracted to the outer side instead to the inner side. And there you see that you, as organization, can be driven by events around you. And exactly what Ken is saying, you have to translate it in a certain, let's say, way of thinking, of language, if you like to call it that way, to make it understandable by some people. And that is the reach out, what I think we have to do more and more. Reflections on this?
Just briefly, in San Diego I'm involved in 3 different activities, none of which are labeled Theosophy. But I'm going to use them as examples, and they all have different methods, 3 different activities, 3 different methods even within them, and they are not connected to each other necessarily. So one of them, about 3 years ago, with a group of friends, and especially with Jeff Solotnik, we began something called the Meditation Initiative. So Meditation Initiative took basic core practice from Buddhist meditation practices and completely removed all language relating to anything to do with Buddhism. So it's totally secularized. The reason for this was so that it could go in the United States, as in most countries, religious practices cannot go into public schools, public hospitals, public prisons are a different situation. It can be either way, because we have freedom of religion in that respect. So there are many places where you cannot take, anything with a religious or specific traditional context. It has to be completely secularized. So this is not difficult to do. So removing language that relates to anything like that, developed a program in San Diego that then was able to have introduce very basic, very simple, very essentially taken from Vipassana tradition primarily, or mindfulness practices. It could be even from Theosophy. The same principles are there. So then you have hospital practices, you have hospice, you have weekly classes in prison, you have various rehab centers, places where outreach to elderly, and so many, and also university campus weekly class I did for a couple of years. So this all developed in that respect. Very effective, very engaged by hundreds of people, maybe more, and it very much needed. Lots of people, in the age realm between 20 and 40, and a little different dynamic there. So another example is also a psychologist friend of mine teaches a class called Mindfulness, Neuroscience, and the Buddha and the Brain, right? So this class is repeating every 6 weeks, so maybe about 6 sessions a year. Again, Doug Brackman has taken core concepts from Buddhism and perennial philosophy, put it into a 6-week session, typically about 30 people per 6-week period combination of people in rehabilitating from various forms of addiction, usually about a third of the class, a third maybe younger people interested, and maybe a third with backgrounds in psychotherapy. And again, very enthusiastically followed consistently, different method entirely than the other one I mentioned. And the third method is a place downtown called the Dharma Bum Temple. Dharma Bums comes from, in American history, the Dharma Bums were the Beats in the 50s, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, etc. So following that mode is a kind of an out-of-the-box, kind of progressive, very loosely organized and taught Buddhism. So that attracts a whole different group of people, mostly younger, mostly college, mostly people that want something non-traditional, traditional. They want something a little bit avant-garde. They want something a little bit freer than, you can go to the Chinese Buddhist temple here and people walk in and they walk right out the door, for the most part, because it's too rigid. So this offers a Buddhism that's very free and open, as an example. You have even children, have many, many, many Buddhist temples in San Diego from different ethnic traditions. But then their children grow up and they find their Buddhist temples rather narrow-minded. And so a lot of the second generation from Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam also show up at a more open and more progressive venue. So these are just some examples, and Theosophy can be applied to any of these 3 types of activity.
The examples Ken gives, they have one thing in common, that they are all interactive. And I think that one of the things for spreading old wisdom is that you have always the teacher-student principle. So I think that one of the things should be that it is interactive. And if we publish things on internet and so on, that there should be a possibility that the people who are interested interact with our society, because if people attending lectures or doing courses we give, then you always see that people need a certain time to get acquainted with the ideas and the principles, because the course is really thinking in a different way, and that is not can you not do by only reading a website. So the interactive aspect is one of the things we should part of the practical solutions in the future, that the interactive aspect is important, because that is part of the Eastern school way disseminating the ancient ideas.
Thank you. Well, first of all, there have been some good ideas I've heard, and some of them I wrote down. Well, I think the first group mentioned that we still have to learn ourselves a lot, and that is something worthwhile to keep in mind. What I like from the other group, from the group from Joop, I would say, is we have the momentum here. So seize the momentum. And in my mind sprang up the words, I think, from Catherine Tingley, where she mentioned, or the three words, I should say, concentration, attention, and discipline. Or perhaps in modern words, it's something like focus, set your goals, and go for it. I think that's that's a very important thing, and from all the ideas going around here, and which are very worthwhile, we have to realize that we are not coming with millions yet, and I'm talking about number of people as well as money. So at the end of the day, and I think it's what Catherine Tingley also did about a century ago, she thought, or she got the inspiration at that moment that Raja Yoga was something the world was waiting for, and she put most of the efforts in there, I believe, and she went for it. So I'm pretty sure the world is waiting for something like that or something else, and we have to find out that and go for it, and not try to go in a million directions, eventually finding out that we have come nowhere.
Thank you. To look at the process side, as Anita said, I think yesterday, or April said yesterday, there was two things I particularly found very interesting. The first is that we obviously, after all these years, still speak the same language, right? Because if we discuss about questions like these, it's very easy to find each other. It's very easy to get to a high level of thought, and also, I think because we have still slightly different perspectives, we add to each other's perspective, so we're actually building our thoughts by discussing these things together. The second thing I liked very much is that there's all these different initiatives everywhere, and everybody is willing to open their door and invite people in, sometimes even literally like Monica and John did yesterday. But then I have to agree with Jos, there's so many things out there now, or so many ideas and so many things that we discuss together that I'm kind of wondering, so what is Point Loma Convivium? What are we doing together? And if there's a momentum, there also has to be a direction, because if there's no direction, then we lose the momentum very rapidly. So I was thinking of, we've seen a lot of pictures, and one thing that struck me was the cornerstones that Catherine Tingley found everywhere. So I'm kind of wondering, what are the cornerstones here? So if we would like to continue, maybe this is too early, but if we want to keep the momentum, maybe it's good that we find something around which we can continue communicating in the year to come. So out of all these ideas that we've shared, what do we want to pick up? Where do we want to keep the momentum going? Because it's good if there's a platform, if there's a forum, or whatever you want to call it, but we need a reason to go there, and we need a reason to get there, and we need to get that ball moving a certain way. So if we have a cornerstone, from the cornerstone we can build whatever we want. Thank you.
Just real brief, because Joop mentioned Meetup, which people didn't seem to be familiar with too much. So in all the groups I mentioned, we not only use email, but also Meetup, Facebook, all those things interact. And it works very well. And actually the problem isn't getting people to come. Many times we have to make sure that, especially in terms of any special event that might come, because venue space is limited, and you want to also have a good interactive situation, we have to make sure too many people don't come, quite honestly.
I'd like to share something with you about a project that I do in my professional life. Because right now we have, I work for a foundation that tries to spread the use of new technology in education. And we have a thinking tank of 21 youngsters between 14 years and 24 years old. And these are people who use Twitter, Facebook, 24 hours a day. They communicate more through Twitter than through each other. And we asked them how we can use new technology in education. So you would think that they would say, okay, we have to make use of more of these new technologies, and because that is what we use in real life, that is what we are going to use in our professional life. But that's not what they said. They stressed that it's more important to have social relationships offline than online. It was really funny. And there's also, just a research was published from managers that they were a bit concerned about the new generation, that they were not able to really concentrate and couldn't really cope with when things went wrong, and couldn't, yeah, it was they didn't listen very well. So there you see exactly the things KT learned from which Jos also mentioned: attention, concentration, determination. And that's, I asked these kids also, do you recognize it? And they came with many examples that it was so hard for them to concentrate. But still, it's their world. So I think that's right now I also in ITC I compared Facebook with the cave. That's now the cave they're in. So we just have to find out how we can make use of these technologies and the strengths of internet, which is being always in the now, always in context. How we can still use that for spreading also Theosophy, but without we have to keep it pure also. So there's a very contradictory. We talked about the medium has to fit the message, and internet is very transitory, and we try to tell about the most enduring teachings. So but there has to be, there is always a way to do it. So that's, I think, one of our challenges. So, but it's good that because you hear many stories about what they call the internet generation. There are other words for it, but that's not true. There's also a lot of research already that shows that the values are still the same. So that's just something I would like to share.
Maybe try a little bit to conclude the situation, and I think it is not an end conclusion in our very dynamic way of living. If you look to the 3 points, the mystery school idea, the tradition, the principle tradition of the Point Loma, and the application of the ideas and principles, you see you need them all 3. You need a type of structure, if you want to call it a mystery school or whatever. I don't care too much, as long as the principle in the gathering is for a certain value. And then you have to hold on to a certain principle, how to address things, why to address them in a certain way, why to present them, and so on and so on. How do we do that? And then, of course, you need the technique in carry it out. That is eigenlijk the 3 main things. And I just called the example for ITC, but we have many other examples. You have to realize that we were able to do this article in a relative short time because we are working with more people together. And that was not people from now and then. No, we know each other. We know each other from Lord's study. We know each other from other activities. And we have worked out over the past 10, 15 years a way of sitting together and inspiring each other. And of course, there is always one, he has the main job to do, but helping, sorting out, generate ideas, discuss the way of presenting and so on. They're all given better meaning. So we have really learned that as group, you do much more than as individual. And that is not something new, that we know already for many thousand years. But we have to do it. And that is the reason that I always try to say that also if we are here or if we do another ITC conference, we are as a group. Last year, in 2010, Gerrit Riek was very much impressed how everything was running. And he said, Herman, you did a perfect job. And I said, sorry, you have to realize there are 100 people involved in it to run the way as it is run on this moment. Dus don't thank me, thank the group, because maybe I'm a little bit of glue in the group and maybe in a little bit of inspiration, or how do you want to call it. But it was possible because we did it with a group. Flying over to here with 27 people, we showed more or less the same idea. Town hall was one absolute dirty place, and it was not taking care of cleaning it and so on. The day before, we have cleaned with 20 people. That was so much that the owner of the caretaker was ringing to Jim and say, hey Jim, what is going on over here? There are 20 people and they want to clean everything and so on. And we were so enthusiastic that we, in our way of working, we clean also the public toilet for the town hall. So, okay, it is as it is. But, you know, we are only possible to do this if we act as a group. And the voice of the silent say, you have to work as the fingers of one hand. And I think that is what we have to demonstrate. But it's also what we have to work on. It is not something what is coming from by nature, because by nature we are working as a person in daily life. We have our own responsibilities, our own ideas, and you have and you need the willing to be tuned and work together. And then you see that working together is very inspiring and is very fun as well. We have a lot of fun together. So, I think it is becoming time to go over to the second point of the day.